Painter Chuck Close famously said, "Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work." Most people think that finding inspiration is hard. But the truth is that having the stamina to keep showing up to make your art is harder. If you do that, the inspiration will come. Welcome to the Passionate Painter Podcast. I'm your host, Caroline Italia Carlson. Whether your art is a full-time career or your side gig, if you are passionate about creating art, this podcast is for you. Don't worry about taking notes. I'll do that for you. And you can find them at passionatepainterpodcast.com. I'm excited to share with you my interview with Portuguese artist Nelson Ferreira. Nelson studied fine arts painting and has exhibited and taught internationally. He is a visiting lecturer for the National Portrait Gallery, National Gallery of Lisbon, Universidade Autónoma de Lisboa, and many other museums and artistic institutions, where he teaches both beginner and advanced levels, including courses on historical painting methods specifically tailored for restorers. Nelson created and runs classes in the Saatchi Gallery, V&A Museum, Chiswick Business Park, Regent Street Crown Estates, and Grosvenor. He's just been awarded a diploma for his continuous research on medieval painting methods, and he's now preparing to advance for his Ph.D. at the Prince's Foundation on the topic of 15th century primitive Flemish oil painting techniques. Nelson resides in London. The interview ran a bit long, so I've broken it into two parts. And this is part 2. If you haven't yet listened to part 1, you'll want to go back and check that out too. It's available now at passionatepainterpodcast.com and all the major podcast directories. Now, I got to put my mom hat on here for a minute because I'm reading about how you love to work in authentic mediums, and some of your iconographic pieces have metals in them like palladium. I mean, these are highly toxic substances. How do you work with those?
Probably that explains a lot of my behavior.
Tell me you're wearing gloves, please.
Actually, I wasn't.
Oh,
oh dear.
These are dangerous materials. You know this.
Well, I wasn't eating it, but I guess you're right. Maybe I'm being a bit... Okay, I do promise to look after myself next time.
Okay.
Yes, when you paint authentic icons, and that was again part of my studies, in order to expand my painting technique, I decided to study Russian and Greek iconography. So the proper icon paintings that you see in Orthodox churches. And I'm not religious myself, but I have the most profound respect for those beautiful traditions, and they do move me at a spiritual level. Those images, I mean, the ones that I see when I go to those churches. So I've ended up working with all the precious metals, because it's part of iconography that if you create something to the glory of God, only the very best materials are worthy of that purpose. So I work with 24 karat gold, I work with palladium, I work with platinum, and nothing else. So I wouldn't use tin or aluminium, or because I do conform to that tradition. But you were asking me something. Sorry, I forgot what it was.
That's okay. I was lecturing you about wearing gloves.
Now, and the mask, probably a dust mask.
Yes, please. Now, I have so many questions for you. Gosh, I know we won't get through them, but I'm going to skip around. And, I first discovered you by stumbling on your article, The Light Fast Pigments and Oil Paints Suggested Brands. You have that list, and I'm so grateful. Thank you for putting that together. I actually geeked out on it for a number of hours. I sat there and I took out index cards, and I made index cards on every paint and their light fastness and translucent quality versus opaque. And I just wanted to really absorb on that level, really a chemistry level, the details about these paints. So how did you come across all of this information yourself? Did you just sink into the internet? What did you do to get such a comprehensive list?
Since I've bought a Kindle, and By the way, I don't represent Amazon, so I'm not endorsing. But since I bought a Kindle, I've been reading compulsively. Like I read maybe 10 times more than in the past. Because you can read at night, although the lights are off in the room, you're still reading, etc., etc., etc. So at the moment, I've read more than 60 painting treatises from the 8th century until the 21st century. So we're talking, yeah, the scope is immense because, again, I have an interest in all traditions of painting, past, present, and future. If I could see the future, I'd be there to learn from them.
Yes.
And a lot of painting treatises from the 19th century, they do discuss the light fastness of pigments in depth, because back in the day, those were new pigments, and some of those new pigments were not performing well at all. So it's very well documented. Artists would paint something, and sometimes within 2 or 3 weeks, a color would fade.
It's fugitive.
Yeah, and manufacturers, like paint manufacturers, they were selling those colors just because they had popular appeal. I'll give you an example. They still do. I'll give you an example. Alizarin crimson.
That was going to be my question.
Yeah.
Yep. Tell me.
Oh God, I'm so critical of alizarin crimson.
I don't use it anymore.
Exactly, it's the most beautiful red. I mean, it's so gorgeous. But the reason why you choose to use it in the first place, which is the beauty of the color, is the reason why you should not use it, because that beauty will fade away in just a few months. Unless you're doing a piece that is just meant to be displayed once.
Or burned.
Or burned. Absolutely.
Now, do you use, I've been using quinacridone rose instead. Do you have a recommendation as a replacement for this?
No, the quinacridones are arguably the best replacement for alizarin crimsons.
Okay.
And also you can mix the color of alizarin crimson. Alizarin crimson is not a primary color.
Right. It's a purple.
Yeah, you can literally mix that color. You can copy it, you can imitate it. And by using light fast pigments, you end up with a color that looks just like alizarin crimson, but that will not fade.
Yeah.
Because genuine alizarin crimson is not light fast, so don't use it.
What do you recommend to actually mix the color then?
It depends on the brand, because this is the problem, is that different color makers, they will use slightly different batches of pigments and different compositions. So, I don't know, example, a quinacridone color from Gamblin might be a totally different shade than a quinacridone color from Winsor Newton or Delarani. So there isn't really... I can't really give you a recipe because it depends on the brands. But if you study the Munsell color system, Munsell made it so crystal clear how to mix any shade and any color. If you master the Munsell color system, you can mix any color from whichever colors you happen to have in your color kit. So essentially, alizarin crimson, I'm just looking at it now, it's the most beautiful red. It's very deep. It's very translucent. But it's warmer, it's browner and more orangey than the quinacridone reds that we usually buy. Quinacridone reds tend to be more purple, correct? Yes. More violet or magenta. So you need to warm it up. So if you mix it with a translucent orange brown, something like a burnt sienna, you kind of nailed the color of alizarin crimson. Okay. I really think alizarin crimson is just for amateurs. If you're a professional artist, you don't use it. Full stop.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, and there's more colors like that. For example, zinc white, never use it. Just don't.
Yeah.
It's guaranteed that your oil paintings are going to crack and flake.
Yes.
And that's terrible. It might take 10 years, it might take 1 century, but it will happen eventually. And zinc white can be replaced by, I know, it's super toxic.
Oh, don't say it.
Just don't eat it. But
me.
lead white is fantastic.
Okay. See, and I don't use it because I'm trying to detoxify my paints. I actually paint, my medium is walnut oil.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Because I can't use the
thinners, right?
Pure Gun spirits of turpentine. I have, as I have gotten older, I have developed, it seems, dozens of allergies to chemicals, and it's not. It possibly is an option now that I have some medication for it. It was causing me a lot of eczema, like dry skin. But my reaction was so strong before I got the medication that finally helped me that I don't go anywhere near the mediums that are thinners, as you said. So I do paint with walnut oil and the artist grade walnut oil, and it's been a miracle for me to get me back to my palette and my studio.
Absolutely. And we have a serious problem in the art world at the moment, which is because of the food industry. Our foods are so toxic, and the air that we breathe, that we actually became intolerant to substances that we wouldn't be allergic to otherwise.
That's right.
So, for example, when I was a student in Fine Art College, nobody used to be allergic to turpentine. And nowadays, we all are. And our bodies can't cope, And so what I'm trying to say is that you're doing the right thing by detoxifying your paint materials.
Yes.
But it's probably more harmful to you, the foods that we eat, than the pigments in the paints.
Yeah.
Because as long as you don't swallow the paint, and as long as you don't have cuts in your skin, and you're not smearing the paint with your fingers and things like that, as long as you just use a brush,
right,
and you keep hygiene in your studio, there are zero chances of getting poisoned by pigments, because pigments are in the paint. They don't go into your body.
That's true, and I do recommend gloves if you're going to be using lead white and different lead-based paints or any other potentially toxic. It was my impression that the phthalo pigments were also toxic, but perhaps not.
I don't think they are. No, I don't think they are. Well, don't eat them.
No, we don't eat any paints.
Exactly, don't eat any paints. But I don't think they're lethal or
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, I saw that you had a note: no cadmium yellow mixing with the phthalos due to a copper content in the phthalo pigments. Yes. Now, does that include, what about other cadmiums? Is it just cad yellow or?
It's mainly cad yellow, and let me make a note on that.
Okay.
It's going to be mostly cheaper paints.
Okay.
As far as I understand, there are two ways of producing cadmium yellow. There's a more evolved method, which is purer, and the cadmium yellow is so refined and so pure that it can be mixed, no problem. But there is another method, which is older, and it's the one that was used in the 19th century, and that contains a lot of free sulfur. And sulfur, so sulfur is contaminating that cadmium yellow. The problem with sulfur is that it violently reacts with copper pigments. That's why in the 19th century, it used to be written not to mix cadmium yellow with copper-based pigments, because back in the day, that cadmium yellow would react. Nowadays, we have better ways of producing cadmium yellow. So if you buy cadmium yellow from a reputable brand, your paints will not react. You can mix them. But if you are using cheaper paints, something might happen. And that's why I still left that note on my website.
Okay.
Avoid mixing cadmium yellow. It's only the yellow, not the orange, not the red. There is a problem with some cadmium yellows and copper-based pigments. But there's also another thing that's mostly documented in watercolor mixes.
Yes, I saw
because, in oils, usually those side effects don't happen because the binder itself envelops the pigment. So you always have linseed oil separating the lumps of pigments. And that means they don't physically react. There is no chemical reaction. But in watercolor, you have to be careful. Some pigments are incompatible.
Yes. Now, you mentioned also reaction with, was it Naples yellow with the cadmiums?
Naples yellow suffers from a problem. If it's mixed with metal, not all metals, but some metals, I believe tin, iron perhaps, etc., it turns gray.
Oh.
And Naples yellow is the most beautiful cream or even bright yellow. It depends on how you make it. There's different shades of Naples yellow. It can go anywhere from this lemon yellow all the way down to a brownish earth color. The problem with Naples yellow is that you should not use metal. And that means palette knives can be a problem. If you mix your paint with palette knives, and if your palette knife is metal, it's going to contaminate the Naples yellow, and that will cause a chemical reaction where the paint will turn gray. So if you like to paint with Naples yellow, there are two things that are recommended. First of all, don't use metal palette knives. Use instead plastic ones are good. They're perfectly fine. Use plastic palette knives to mix the color. And then after your painting is finished, and after waiting the traditional 6 months at least, varnish the painting. Because Naples yellow can also tarnish with pollution. Air pollution can react with Naples yellow.
Now, is there a certain kind of varnish you recommend that won't yellow the painting?
Yes, all the modern synthetic varnishes are the best. So this is one thing where modern art materials are way superior to the techniques from the past. When it comes to varnishes, hands down, it's always the modern varnishes that are better. Traditional varnishes, they were not good at all. They would crack, they would turn brown, they would, a series of misery. But with traditional varnishes, you always encounter problems, or they stay tacky, like damar varnish. It stays sticky, for example, not good.
Okay.
Modern varnishes, synthetic varnishes are the best. I can't really recommend you a brand because, again, it depends on your own taste. Some people like them flat, other people like them really glossy. You need to try and choose, but if you stick to the very modern ones, like the ones made by Gamblin, by Winsor & Newton, again, reputable companies.
Okay.
Rublev, in America, there's a fantastic brand called Rublev. Rublev was the name of an icon painter from Russia. It's spelled Rublev, Rublev. And it's a fantastic brand of oil paints. Most of my paints nowadays are Rublev. I import them from the States. And they also make very good varnishes. But again, I don't endorse any maker because they're all very good. When it comes down to varnishes, they're all fantastic.
Sure. Well, thank you for that information. That's very important. Now, what would you say is the most important skill that artists should practice to advance their abilities? Would it be focus on a solid drawing foundation? Would it be more color mixing or color value? Does any one skill stand out beyond the rest for you as a teacher of art?
Yes, but first I need to ask in which style of painting. So let's say classical realism, right?
Okay.
Let's imagine classical infused art.
Yep.
Classical realism, which nowadays is having a great comeback in America. It's becoming quite popular with the Atelier movement. So I think a lot of our audience, our listeners will be interested in that style. For classical arts, drawing.
Okay.
90% of the quality of your painting is going to be your drawing skills. I encounter, when I teach arts, the most frustrating thing for a teacher is seeing a student juggling with oil paints when actually it's the drawing that is lacking. And because the drawing is not there, the student will apply the right color but in the wrong place, or the right color but with the wrong shape. And then that means you have to color on top of that and do the corrections. And again, because the drawing is lacking, the correction will be painted again on the wrong place. And that means that instead of doing a painting in, let's say, 1 or 2 hours, it might take you 20 hours because you are constantly correcting the wrong shapes and then the wrong values.
Yeah.
When I say the wrong values is lights should belong to the light and shadows should belong to the dark. And people that can't draw, they don't really know how dark they should go in the shadows, or they don't know how light they should go in the lights. They can't judge value. They, for the listeners that are not acquainted with the painting language, with the painting jargon, value means how light or how dark a color should be. So a high value would be a very pale tint, and a low value would be a very deep, dark shadow. Beginners always mess it up. So a beginner will make their lights dirty and dark, so the lights are not glowing.
Yeah.
And beginners will be afraid also of shading the shadows with the right intensity, so the shadows will look too pale and wishy-washy. Do you know what I mean? Like there is no drama.
Yes.
And
what about incorporating color temperature in there as far as a factor?
color temperature is crucial, but it should be taught only after the student masters drawing and value.
Okay.
So I'm going to give an example. In the 19th century, which was a very tough time to study, because academies used to be, very old school, probably with a cane. If we didn't perform well, there would be some sort of punishment.
Yes.
But that's how they trained some of the best artists in history. Painters like John Singer Sargent,
Yes.
Anders Zorn, all those painters, they went through the very hard training of academic study. And the best art school in France during those days, it was called the Julian Academy. And the Julian Academy used to offer this 8-year full-time course. So it was 8 years full-time, where for the first 3 years, the students could only draw.
Wow.
Can you imagine nowadays? If you did this in any university, the backlash and how people would revolt. But back in the day, this was the way they would do it. So the first 3 years, they could only draw. They were not allowed to paint. Until you master proportion, until you master light and shadow, until you learn how to make a shape turn in space and make it three-dimensional, until you master how to control people's emotions by, for example, lightening up your drawing, create a high key drawing to make it uplifting, or do the reverse, darken everything more than it's needed to make it more melancholic, or, for example, boost the contrast to make it dramatic, or make the reverse, learn to reduce the contrast to make it more in harmony. Until you master those things, there is no point holding a brush, because painting just adds another level of complication on top of that. So 3 years of drawing, they would excel at drawing. After they graduate from the drawing program, which are 3 years, they would start painting, and for another 2 years, they would only paint black and white.
Grisaille?
Grisaille only.
Wow.
So we're talking the first 5 years of classical training would be in black and white only.
Wow, which is challenging in the sense that you have to translate what you're looking at, because what you're looking at is often not black and white. For instance, if it's not a black and white still life, you're translating to making the conversion in your head
Exactly.
to simply values right on the spot.
Absolutely. And it's very difficult to do. It's actually quite difficult to paint a colorful subject like flowers, for example, in black and white and still make your painting look alive.
It is.
Instead of dead. And then the classical training, the first 5 years would be black and white because it's that important.
It is, really.
It's all drawing. You are still drawing, but with a brush. But it's still drawing. Yeah. And then finally, on the 6th year, you were given color temperature. So you were still painting in black and white, but for the first time, you would be allowed cool grays against warm grays. So you discover the power of color temperature on your 6th year of full-time training. You discover that it's actually color temperature that is the key to liveliness in color. It's not so much the colors we use, it's more how we organize the color in the painting. I'll give you an example. A lot of classical painters, they would avoid using blue because blue was too expensive. Back on the day, you could only have a good blue from lapis lazuli.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So expensive. It used to be 3 times more expensive than gold.
Yeah.
So painters had to devise ways of painting blue without using blue. What would they do? Painters like Titian are fantastic at doing this. They would create a warm painting, so everything in the painting is very golden. Yellows, oranges, reds, and browns, they predominate, and black and white. And then a simple gray, a simple mix between black and white, which makes a cool gray, makes a kind of a bluish gray. And if you paint gray in your painting, but that gray is surrounded by those warm colors, that gray will read as a positive blue.
Wow.
So a lot of those blues that you see in art museums, when you look at Renaissance paintings, they contain no blue at all. It's an optical illusion. And artists in the 19th century, they would learn how to make a very limited palette read as having many colors. Does this make sense? If you're so good that you can even make gray sing like blue,
Yeah.
imagine how that blue will really sing when you are given a real blue.
Yeah.
And you know how to make a color sing, how to give voice to a color. Even gray becomes luminous and vibrant when you are a master of color. And that mastery starts by just learning color temperature. You don't deal with colors yet. You just deal with warms or cools, you know. Finally, on the 7th and 8th year of their training, they were given color. Finally. But we're talking 19th century, correct? Has to be tough. They had to make things tough for the students. So on the 7th year, they would work with a compressed palette. They would use, for example, black, white, red, and perhaps yellow ochre. And that's it. And again, you have to create greens. How? By mixing yellow and black. Yellow and black will give you green.
Right.
You have to create blues. How? You already know. By using a warm painting, and then by painting gray, the gray will read as blue. Because you don't have blue in your palettes, you know? How are you going to do it? This is the challenge. Only when you reached your 8th year, you were given the full palette with all the colors. Now, this very tough training produced some of the best painters in history.
Yeah, it did. That's remarkable. I did not realize that they had such training around the lack of use of blue.
It's just a curiosity. I'll give you another example. Purple was also not used. So how are you going to make purple? Simple. If you mix red and gray, you end up with a kind of a purplish gray that, again, in the context of a warm golden painting, it's going to read as violet.
Wow.
So you can use colored grays to actually create the illusion of bright color.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, but that only works if you understand color temperature. That only works if you understand context. That only works if you realize that a pale gray looks extremely dark if it's surrounded by white.
True.
And that very same pale gray will look like pure white if it's surrounded by black. So it has to do with optical illusions. If you become a master of color temperature, you can really make colors much more vibrant than what the color is by itself. You create the context to make that color sing. You know, I like to use the word singing because when color is vibrant, to me, it becomes like musical sound. You know, it cuts through the atmosphere like sound does, and it just hits our eyes and goes straight to the heart. There's something quite beautiful about color that is luminous and clean and just vibrant, not garish, vibrant.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I'm going to give you 2 more questions. I know we're running over, but you have such gems to give our listeners, and I'm absolutely loving this conversation. I am so curious now. Tell me how you got into team building workshops in the corporate space with painting. Am I right?
Yes. Well,
how is that received? Are these all painters?
Caroline, like everything in my life, it was an accident.
I love it.
Well,
serendipity.
Some people would claim that life itself is an accident, right?
Right.
It can be claimed. So it all started. So let's say 15 years ago, I'd say, when I moved to London, I started teaching. Well, my first job was just in a cafe. I had just moved to London. I had no national insurance number. I had to work in order to get my national insurance number, and only after you are registered for tax, only then you can create your own company. So I worked in a cafe just for 3 months. When I got my national insurance number, immediately I dropped that job and I started working as an artist and also as an art teacher. I began by teaching in community centers. I had some students. I didn't know who those students were. You know, you just advertise and people come and they join your classes. Some people like it, some people don't like it. It's
Sure.
just the way it is. And you end up with some students that start following you. So it doesn't matter where you go, they still enroll, and they enroll I have students that have been with me for almost 15 years now, and they keep coming back to more courses. And one thing that I've discovered eventually was that some of those students had a lot of power. When I say power, is either financially or in terms of influence. But I wasn't aware of that, I was just teaching people in the local community center. What happened was that over the years, I started getting invitations from people that had attended my courses in the past, and then they would ask me to come and teach for their company, the company that they work for. For example, I received the most delicious email from a student of mine. She attended, I'd say maybe 3 classes of mine or 4, and then she quit. She just disappeared. So I was under the impression that she didn't like the course, When someone pays for 10 lessons and they just come for 3 or 4 lessons, you presume they didn't like it. So that's what I thought. I was sad, but that's life. That's the way it is. Life carries on. So 2 years later, I receive an email, the most delicious email. It's British humor, which I love. And she said, "Hey Nelson, how are you? Do you remember the silly blonde that can't paint?" Which is her, And then she said, "I work for this company, so and so, and I went to attend several art classes across London, and we decided to choose you to come and teach for us." So actually, that's the reason why she quit, because she was just testing different teachers. And then they invited me to teach for them, and it's actually a very big company. It's called Grosvenor, and you've got all sorts of things. The same happened with the National Portrait Gallery. It was an ex-student of mine that over the years moved into a position of power within the gallery, and she remembered how the lessons were. So it was actually the National Portrait Gallery that contacted me to go and run 2 workshops for them as the invited artist. And I was really proud, because one of those workshops was when they were exhibiting drawings by Leonardo da Vinci, Rembrandt, and Holbein, which are like my gods,
wow.
In terms of art. And I was the chosen artist to teach the techniques of Renaissance drawing, which includes metal points, silver points.
Well, I bet you flipped out. Well, Albrecht Dürer.
Absolutely. And it was just, I could say it was partially an accident, because if my ex-student hadn't moved into the education department, maybe the invitation wouldn't come through. But I also have a theory, which is you never know who you're going to encounter in life.
That's right.
So just be the best professional that person is ever going to meet. If you really stand out from the crowd, all sorts of invitations will come to you eventually. It might take 1 year, it might take 10 years, but it's going to happen. At least in the Western world, we are lucky, because we live in societies where opportunities can abound, because there is money. There is disposable income. I don't believe in the law of attraction, by the way. I think it's slightly short-sighted. I think if I was born in a country at war, it didn't matter if I was good or not. No opportunity would come my way, probably. So I'm very lucky that I live in a rich country like Britain or Portugal. We haven't faced war, we haven't faced famine, and these things do happen to you. So my suggestion is always to the listener, just be the very best professional that you can be. Be the best art teacher out there, or be the best painter out there, and this type of invitations will come your way as well.
Thank you. That's very encouraging. So as we wrap up here, can you please tell our listeners how they can learn more about you? And I'll be sure to put links to your website and some of the works we discussed into the show notes as well.
Oh dear, I'm a computer illiterate.
That's okay. I can link up to your webpage and
please do.
All of your information.
I'm not very good with social media, in the sense that I do publish things on social media, but for example, I can't even remember the name of my Instagram account. But if you're kind enough to then link down there, that would be great. My website is probably still the most relevant bit, although it's slightly outdated, okay. But I do revise it from time to time. So it's nelson-ferreira.com. Ferreira has to be spelled It's FERREIRA. And it's probably the best place to start. And then from that website, you have all the links to Instagram, Facebook, etc. LinkedIn is my favorite, actually. And that's something I would like to say to our listeners. I found during these years that LinkedIn was probably the most effective way to expand your business. So when it comes down to thousands of viewers, LinkedIn is not the place. It would be a place like Instagram or maybe Facebook, although I'm under the impression that Facebook is dying. But Instagram is probably the place to get your art seen by hundreds of people, thousands of people. But you're not going to sell, and this is the problem. So Instagram, you're going to get lots of likes, but you don't sell. And that's I believe that's mostly because most of the viewers on Instagram tend to be quite young, and they don't have yet money. As with LinkedIn, it's a different story. LinkedIn is full of corporate managers, lawyers, doctors, etc., 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 and they tend to be your clientele. They tend to be the ones that have money to actually buy art from you. So, I highly, highly recommend LinkedIn for your business.
That's very true, that you're going to get a smaller amount of conversions in LinkedIn, but they're going to be of higher quality.
Yes, and especially if you contact people, because LinkedIn allows you to approach people, which is fabulous. It's so democratic,
Well, I'm so happy that you were responsive to me when I was looking to contact you.
Oh, it's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor as well here. I appreciate you so very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And also thanks to our listeners for going through all these very long stories. I hope they were helpful somehow.
They're wonderful stories and funny and inspiring. And I really cherish the time we've had. So thank you so much, Nelson. And I will hope to speak with you again.
This wraps up part 2 of my interview with Nelson Ferreira. Join me next time for an interview with mosaicist Joseph Cafton. And if you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode. Until next time, go make something.